welcome to the Shema podcast series, Strive for Truth. This series is based on the teachings of Rabbi Eliyahu Dessler, one of the most profound Torah thinkers of the early 20th century. In these conversations, I'm joined by Rabbi Michael Cohen, a longtime student and teacher of his work. This is not a series about inspiration or quick takeaways. It's about clarity, learning to see reality honestly and aligning our lives with what is real. Welcome back to the Shema podcast, my friends, and the next installment of Strive for Truth with Rabbi Michael Cohen. Today I asked Rabbi Cohen to sort of go back through and bring some more clarity and fill in some gaps with some of the essays we covered so far, and then use that to lead into some recent essays in the book. We have covered the important topic of giving and taking, sort of the barometer of our life. We come in this world created just to want to take, and then with the mission statement of moving to a state of giving. But Rav Dessler sort of brings out what we learned in the last essay from the last episode, how we are inherently so biased. And in the essays we're going to be covering today, the natural way of man that really seems like it's almost an impossible task. There's so much weighing against our ability to make any types of decisions with any type of clarity whatsoever in order to accomplish this mission. So, Rabbi, thank you so much for being back here with us once again. If you would sort of go back, if you will, I want to make sure everyone has a very detailed, clear understanding of what we learned so far, so we know on a practical standpoint what the task is here and the solutions are here. From our conversations and then what we were sort of having offline, it made me think of teaching I heard from Rabbi Yokov Wolbe a few parshas ago about how when Moshe Rabbeinu was given the task of creating the menorah, he was given a block of gold. And Hashem just said, now remove everything that's not the menorah. And likewise, what you were saying, the whole purpose of this book, Strive for Truth, is that the truth is within us. We are, like we say in the morning, our neshamas are perfect. It's just that we go through life and we do a lot to cover up the truth of ourselves and what we're here to bring to the world. And I think it's why it's so clear why Hashem tells us to be constantly studying Torah, to talk about when we're on the way, because if we're not discussing Torah, thinking about Torah, we're just being unconsciously brainwashed with things that are just totally not true. And we're, in our youth, developing these personality scripts that are there to help us take. And then we spend an adult life learning Torah, trying to figure out how to unravel all those scripts that we're all about taking from the world around us. Getting the things that Hashem's saying is you already have: love, security, all the things that Hashem said I'll provide to you. But we sort of build that, I think, in our youth on how do we get that from other people. And so a lot of this, it seems like, is unraveling all this clutter that gets attached to us. I think that's where he's going with all these essays as well.
Right, precisely. It's right. You put it very well. I mean, unraveling. It's really about unraveling all these things that surround us and become part of us in our youth. And as a child grows up, they're surrounded by love and surrounded by taking, but they're really the center of everything that's in their world. And they see themselves as the center of everything. And then we grow up and then we start realizing that there's more to life than taking. And that's really, as I see the piece, the resistance of this whole work is this kuntras chesed, as Rabbi Campbell pointed out at the beginning, this discourse on loving kindness, that we live in a world which is each person, the way Rabbi Dessler presented this is, we could drill down, we'll see that each one of us is pretty binary in our world. Everything that we do is either an act of giving or taking. And a very important part of just going forward through the next essays as we learn through Strive for Truth is understanding what the cure for that is. Of course, we know what the problems is. This is not about finding the problems. It's about looking to the solutions. And that's the question he asks. So what is the solution for a person who finds himself in the situation where they're really taking most of the time? And any transaction that we go through in life, we find that there's normally a giver and a taker, right? The person gives a gift. So there's a giver and there's a taker. So what's the answer? How a person wants to develop within them this quality of being a giver. Well, can they not take a gift from somebody? Well, how are they to go through business? How are they supposed to go life? What does marriage look like? So in the discourse on loving kindness, Rabbi Dessler addresses marriage, right? He talks about marriage as being a relationship where each person is coming into that relationship to give 100% of themselves. Now, that's a very high, and sometimes people, when I mention this to married couples or individuals who are married and they want to have a perfect marriage, they say, well, it's got to be give and take. But actually, one has to be able to relinquish oneself and become vulnerable and actually put oneself in a situation of trust and giving in order to be able to experience what it is to be in a give-give relationship, which is really what we're talking about. And so what's the antidote and how does one develop that? So Rabbi Dessler talks about gratitude as being the backbone of giving. And when one faces everything with gratitude, so then that one's perspective changes. All of a sudden, one's gracious and giving, and the world can change as a result of that. That's part of what he's talking about. I think one thing that I think we glossed over last time is one of the biggest challenges we have in life is being pre-programmed from youth, unfortunately often by our parents or teachers and our peers, that we need to succeed, and success is something in life. We're looking to success. And what is success? But the truth is that's the biggest illusion. It's the biggest scam. There is no such thing as what is success? Success is having the most money, having the more friends, having the best job. There's no point at which a person will say, well, I've reached success. Success is really often used as a term for what can I take and how can I be, and if I need to be able to success, I need to get, but that becomes a giving conversation, a taking conversation where one's taking all the time. How can one take? How can I get ahead in life so that I'll be at the point where I can say, wow, I've got it? But we very seldom see a person who ever says, well, I've got enough money now, I'm going to get out, I'm going to retire, or I'm going to get out, stop gambling, or stop what I'm doing. People are constantly trying to get ahead, trying to get more, trying to get more. That's this whole world, this world of taking. So Rabbi Dessler addresses that. He says, well, what's the solution to taking? Gratitude is one thing. Yes, living in a world of gratitude. Putting down one's guard and coming in with an understanding that it's not about my success. The world's not about my success. Actually, my success is going to be dependent on what I can give to others. And that's not going to be the yardstick's not going to be how I'm succeeding, but rather how my friend is succeeding. How are they succeeding? How's he doing better? It's something it's a mindset. It's really a different mindset. And if we really look at it and look at the coaching world, it's really mindset work. This whole all the chapters that we've been dealing with are really talking about how do we change our own mindset? How can we have a mindset of giving? So yes, there's a vulnerability one has to be able to lower one's guard, be gracious, live with gratitude, give up the idea of I'm going to succeed in life and I'm going to get ahead, but rather see how I can help other people get ahead. How can I help other people succeed? How can I help the people around me do well? And with that, automatically one feels a change in one's life and in oneself. That's this concept of loving kindness. That's the discourse on loving kindness. That's where we left off, really. That's where he leaves off in loving kindness. And when we come to the next question, which is, how does the world exist that way? So there's a beautiful story Rabbi Dessler tells at the end of this discourse on loving kindness with Alexander the Great. So the Medrash says that Alexander the Great went to a far-off land, and he saw that he asked them, how do your judges deal with cases? So he said, well, let's come and sit in a case. So he sat in on the Alexander the Great. So the Great sat in on a case, a litigation that was taking place. And one person said, well, I sold this person this piece of land, and I sold the land. And that was what I sold. And the other person said, well, I bought the land, and that was what I bought. But we have a problem. Why? Well, I was digging in the field and I found a treasure, a treasure trove of gold and silver and wonderful things. And it's not mine. I bought the land. I didn't buy the jewels. They must be given back to the seller. And the seller says, no, I sold the land and everything that's in it. It's not mine. It belongs to him. And each one is saying, no, it belongs to the other guy. The other person should win. The other person should win. So the judge said, well, Alexander the Great looks to the judge. How's he going to judge his case? So he says, the judge says to the first man, tell me, do you have a daughter? He says, yes. And the other man says, do you have a son? The other person says, yes. He says, okay, your son and daughter, they're of marriageable age? He said, yes. Okay, your son will marry his daughter, and this money will be for the dowry. Oh, wow, the case is solved. Alexander says, I don't understand. What are you doing? So he said, the judge turns to Alexander the Great and says, what do you mean? What's wrong with it? She said, how could you judge this case this way? Well, how would you judge this where you come from, Alexander the Great? So, well, in my land, this guy says it doesn't belong to him. This guy says, I'll kill both of them, and I'll take the land, and I'll take the property. And I'll take the money and the jewels. I'll take the treasure. So the judge of the new land says to Alexander the Great, says, tell me, do you have animals in where you are? Cows and sheep? I said, yeah, we have. So he says, does it rain where you live? He says, yeah. He says, you know what? I know it rains for the cows and the sheep. It doesn't rain for the people. Now, there's a deep story. It's a very funny story, but it's a deep story. And that is, we're part of a global process which is going on in the world around us. And if we think that everything's dependent upon us and I can take the jewels and I can kill the two parties and I'm going to be okay, you have to understand you're living in a world which is way greater and way bigger. There's a cosmos, there's a universe, there's seasons, there's a world, there's rain, there's a whole thing that's going on around us. Our world is dependent upon how we act within it. So if you're a giver, the world's running for you. The world's existing for you. You're creating a dynamic in the world that the world can function. But if you're a taker, you're actually just a slip out of the world. You're pulling something out from the world. You're not letting the world function in the way that it was supposed to be. It was supposed to function. But any one of us listening to this story would think, wow, that's a really funny story, but that's not real. But Rabbi Dessler is telling us that no, actually, that is actually the real world. That's the way God created the world. God created the world that it functions as a giving environment. And we have, as human beings, we're at the top of the food chain. We're the givers in this world.
We're supposed to be.
Yes, we're supposed to. When we're living our best lives, that's who we are. That's how to live the best life that we can have. And so there's no place for a person to say, well, I'm a victim of circumstances and it all happened to me. But actually, we're actually running the world. We're actually in the driving seat. We're actually the ones who are creating the world that we live in. And just on that note of creating, so he says, the truth is, if we look at the relationships around us, financial relationships even, right? So normally we talk about a give and take relationship. Sometimes we talk about a give-give relationship or a take-take relationship or a take-give relationship. But so if one looks at the world from the perspective of a giver, one's always looking for situations where the ideal transaction is where both parties are giving. I'm giving to you because I feel I can benefit you and this is the best product that's going to help you. And you're giving to me because you feel that you're the best customer and you can help me to do my job, which is to sell the product. You're going to help me give. So each person is giving. And that's the ideal marriage, where both parties come to the situation where this is an opportunity to give. And that's why a person is considered to be only whole when they're married. Because when you're in marriage, you're in a situation with a unique relationship where you can give and you can facilitate someone else to give. And that's a give-give relationship. And that's a perfect marriage. But the moment one of the parties feels that they want to take, so then there's a danger. The danger is really for themselves because the other party, you go into a transaction, you can create the person with whom you are having the transaction with as a giver. You create them as a giver because we live in this is the idea. This is my caveat. That we live in a created world and we have the ability to create the people around us as givers. A husband can create his wife, a wife can create a husband as a giver, and having a possibility to create a situation of give, even though that person might come to the table as being a taker. But I can open up the idea that, no, this is an opportunity for you to give and an opportunity for me to give.
So you're saying that from what the Rabbi Dessler is teaching here, that the way we perceive another help.
We create them. We create them through our interactions with them. And when we create somebody as a taker, unfortunately, they can sink into that problem. But we can create the people around us as givers.
Because there are people who think that like everyone's trying to pull one over on them. Right. They're so mistrusting of everyone, every interactions. They're, and when you think that way about other people, then that is actually what you're sort of projecting and creating in the world. And a lot of that is projection anyway, because that's how you are. If you're a trusting person, you believe everyone's a giver and your goal is to be a giver, then you're going to perceive everyone and being a giver as well. And that's going to bring that reality into the world from them. The marriage is, like you said, is the real testing ground of this, because outside of marriage, we can have a public life and a private life. The world is, the rest of the community sees Dan Coleman public version. My wife has to see Dan Coleman private version, and she knows when those are out of alignment. It either forces you, if you want a harmonious marriage, to be giving.
And the truth is, not only our wives, even deep down ourselves, we know where we're not aligned. And that also is very difficult for us sometimes, right? So I know who I really am. And it's very difficult in relationships to pretend to be something that we're not. So it really means that we have to drill down to recognize who we really are. There's recognize that the taker is not really who we are, right? But that's a lot of mindset to acknowledge and recognize that that's actually not who I am. I am really a giver,
right?
Which is the roots of Musa. Because again, many people talk about Musa in a very negative way because they feel it's bringing out the negativity. Oh, we're talking about arrogance. We're talking about taking, for example. But the way Rabbi Desta deals with Musa, and that gets to the next essay which we dealt with last week, which is the roots of Musa. The real way he deals with it is he said, no, actually, you have a say in who you are. You're living in a created world, so that's actually not who you are. So the idea of Musa is understanding that there were things that got in the way of who you are when you were young, or maybe over time when you were later in life as well, that got in the way and show up as if that is your identity, but it actually isn't who you are, right? It's just something that came along from an experience that happened to you. Often when speaking to people, they'll talk about things that happened to them when they were very young, and that created a way of being, but that's not really who they are. And it takes mindsets to be able to look at oneself and say, no, that's not really who I am. That's something that happened to me. And as a result of that, I acted in a certain way and I'm treating the world in that way, but that's not really who I am. So the roots that when we get to the essay of the roots of Musa, the idea of Rabbi Desta's view of Musa is actually it's connecting with the great you, because actually you have total greatness. You have a neshama, you're a great person within you. But it's all this confusion and things that happened along the way that resulted in us acting in a certain way when we're confronted. But that's not really who we are. So in the progress of these essays, in giving and taking, we're talking about saying we are the ones who create whether we're going to be a giver or a taker. That's our choice. We can really connect with our real self, which is giving, and through that, create a giving world around us, create the people around us as being giving. And then through that, we can actually acknowledge and realize that actually we ourselves are naturally givers. That's who we really want to be. That's the roots of Musa. But then when it comes to saying, well, the world got in the way. How come I'm not that way all the time? How come I do make wrong decisions? And then recognize, there's been bias all around us that take us out, and self-interest which pull us in different ways. And that was all the examples that we gave last week of different people judges who recused themselves because they felt that they were being pulled one way or the other because of some external factor. But the real truth is that they didn't have to necessarily recuse themselves. That's a very important point, which is not brought out so clearly in the essays, but the Chazon Ish points this out in his essays. The Rabbi Mishai Karlitz, who was a contemporary of Rabbi Desta, was that once one has that recognition and one knows that one is being influenced, so then the game's up. So now you know that there's some external factor that's happening, and one has the ability, and this is a tremendous exercise that one can do, and we talked about it at the beginning, is just to step back and watch one's mind, watch the thinking and how it's going. Oh, this is that's a calculation, but just watch it. It's actually happening in one's mind, as we talked last week, right? This Dr. Jack Schwartz in California. You're not your mind. You're not your brain. Your brain is something separate. It's a muscle that's working, and you're living it. You're riding your brain, and you can actually watch the conversation take place. And that's not really who you are. That's something you're observing that taking place. And so they didn't have to recuse themselves because they could have been able to divorce themselves from those petty arguments and really find the truth. That was in the roots of Musa. And that brings us really to the next essay, which is know what to answer, which is a very short essay. If you've got the book, it's on page 173. It's just a very short essay, but it's a real very hard-hitting essay, because what he's saying over there is, you may see a person who's very intellectual. We've seen these people, right? A great guy. He could be a politician. He could be a successful politician or a judge or a professor. And he's in a restaurant and the waiter spills a soup on his lap. And all of a sudden he's shouting, he's screaming, he's got out of control. What happened? But he lost himself. How did he lose himself? Why? Because he's very intellectual. He's got a lot of knowledge, but he never took the time to work on his character, to be able to take himself out from his brain in order not to get entangled in the gritty things that are happening around him. And so the slightest thing, or even a small thing, or maybe a big thing, will set him off. And now he loses his temper, or he loses control. And all of a sudden we see that actually what appears to be an intelligent person, yeah, he's trained himself, he's learned a lot, he's an intelligent person, he speaks beautifully, but he's never taken the time to work on his character. And so can this person make an unbiased decision or choice in his life? No, he's going to be weighed down by his character. His or her character. The character's weighing them down because they've got vested interest. So the answer is, well, you look at great people and you say, well, they didn't believe in God. How could it be such a great scientist or such a great politician or so doesn't believe in God? The answer is, yeah, because they never had never had the ability to have an honest look at the world, to be able to see the truth for what it is. The truth eludes them because they're weighed down by their own character and by their own bias and by own things that pull them down.
And history shows that great intellect can lead to very distorted and cruel conclusions. Like I think it's Socrates, some of his essays where he pontificates about the logic and rational reason and how it's so beneficial for society that everyone just throws their unwanted babies into the trash heaps. About the introduction of young men into sexuality through having an older man. He talks about this like this is like such logic, like anyone else, like it's like this distorted. Or look at the Nazis. They had very tough animal cruelty laws. I mean, they saw themselves as civilized, compassionate people. And if they saw someone harming a dog, person would get in a lot of trouble. And they would take care of that person at the same time as they went off to work at Auschwitz to exterminate Jews.
Right. And when we are subject to our own character and sometimes negative characters, which pull us in either directions, that Rabbi Cohen Wasserman wrote an essay about this in Kovetz Mamorim. He writes, why is it that scientists don't all in one go say, listen, there are so many proofs of God in the world, in the universe, in our human body. You just have to open your eyes to it. But the trouble is that opening your eyes and admitting that there's a God brings around a lot of obligations, which people don't want to admit to. But gratitude is something which also people are very hesitant to actually have to be indebted to somebody because somebody did something for them. But how much more so if we would say that God created the world, how much indebted are we to God? We couldn't, in one moment, we could live a million years. We would not be able to thank God for the blessings that he bestows upon each one of us. It just the miracle that is the human eye, the miracle that is our lungs, the miracle that is every part of our body. It's just mind-blowing. But again, then no scientist, no biologist, no doctor turned around and said, wow, great, you've just a clear proof of God in the world. But if you've ever read any of the works of Rabbi Victor Miller, right, so Rejoice, O Youth, he talks about the miracles that there are in every fruit, an orange, the color of an orange, which many animals can't even determine, a green from orange, right? It doesn't have to be orange. The animals, but humans have eyesight which can discern color, and God created that for us, and it's a beautiful thing. So that's the character, the way character gets involved in the choices and decisions that we make in life. That's what this idea of this know what to answer is. There's nobody who can say, well, I'm an intellectual, and therefore I can lecture you on character or morals in the world, because actually that's not true. Intellect is not a proof of morals, right? The Torah and somebody who's completely righteous and has given up this world and had given up, trying to get ahead and trying to be better than other people and taking, such a person can really give us a good insight into what's valuable and what's real and important in life.
Yeah. I remember when the first Torah observant Jew I ever got to know was Rabbi Yokov Wolbe early on. And I shared this in my first season, but it was what struck me is that I met someone who was extremely intelligent and he was very sweet and humble, because everyone else I met that was really successful, that was really high IQ, they were arrogant jerks. And I just accepted that that's the way it is. If you're going to be, if you're highly intelligent, highly successful, you're going to be an arrogant jerk. You're going to talk down to the wait staff and do all these other things, right? And I see someone that's just broke all those rules. And of course, I come to a community and meet so many people like that. But that shows that the difference between someone who's just working, who accepts that I'm not my intellect, I'm my midos, I'm my character. That's what I need to focus on.
Precisely, and that's why we have this concept of, which is actually derech eretz kodma Torah, that even before one can engage in Torah study, one has to have refined one's character, and then obviously through Torah study, one's character is refined further, and to the degree that it says you can't have derech eretz unless you have Torah. But the first thing, the prerequisite, is character development, right? It drilling down to who you really are, what your character is, and then going to Torah, and then having that humility when you learn Torah.
And as you said earlier, I mean, our default is perfection. I mean, it's a neshama. It's the closest thing to Hashem. I mean, we are built to be givers like Hashem. For those of you who have been long-term listeners, know I did that episode like a year and a half ago. I got a lot of response from where we had a Rebbitzin on that has spent her life interviewing people that had near-death experiences, Jews and non-Jews. And the one thing they all have in common, you're talking about probably close to 1,000 people, because it's happening more and more and more and more because of the medical technology allows that Hashem created to allow people to come back to this world and boost our emunah. But they all said the same thing. Once their soul was sort of hovering, they felt nothing but complete love for everyone in the room. And I made the joke to her. I said, well, I assume everyone in the room agreed with them on politics. And she said, no, I don't really think that matters to them, because that is our natural state. And the goal is to remove all the gook and the clutter and bring that out. And that's through this character development, as he's talking about. It's not to do with intellect. It's about character refinement.
Right, exactly. So there's this point that we can do that. It's like a meditation. You can meditate yourself. You just realize it. Observe your brain and observe who you are, and that you really connect with that higher being, right? That you really are. So then in the next essay, when he talks about Torah truth, so Rabbi Dessa discusses, okay, so the next thing is, well, maybe if I've got an issue in my life and now I'm not sure what I should choose or decide what I should do, well, now I'm stuck because I'm bogged down by my own biases, and I'm not able necessarily. Maybe I feel I can't get away from it. So I'm stuck in the weeds now. How do I get out of that? So that's where a Torah scholar can be of assistance. Because if we have a situation where, he talks about the old days when they used to have these beautiful mazes, right? You have these gardens which have hedges arranged in a maze, and you walk in like a corn maze, right? And you walk into the maze, and you're stuck, right? You try to find your way out. Sometimes they're elaborate, sometimes they're not so difficult. But back in the day, it used to be they had these mazes with hedges, elaborate mazes, and they would have a tower, and there'd be a guy on top guiding you through the maze if you got stuck. So that's the idea. There's a Talmud Chacham, somebody you can go to, a friend who's removed, who has done the work and is removed, has a pure character, and they can guide you through the maze of life and say, okay, take this turn, take that turn. This is a good thing to do. And that's something which we heavily rely on in the Torah world, is to ask what we call Das Torah, a Torah giant who can guide us in different questions that we have. What should we do in various situations, whatever it may be, in areas of chinuch of raising children. So it's very often that parents will go to a parenting course, or they go to a rabbi who's developed a parenting course, or maybe whatever, maybe a matter of a life coach, or maybe something else. That one goes to a rabbi who can guide us through situations and through various situations that come to us or happen to us in life. That's this idea of this true Torah perspective.
Number one solution to the problem is accept that you have biases and have a trusted rabbi. We all have our blind spots. They can see around that, just like we can see around other people's blind spots more than they can, because they're going to guide you through all those difficult, challenging little situations in life.
Right. That's the beauty of having a rabbi. Then Rabbi Destler Carmelin raises the point, which is really true, which is the danger when going to a rabbi is that one won't tell him the full story, right? So, great. If I would give him all the facts, he'd come up with the right answer. But unfortunately, because I'm already predisposed to one side or the other, I might not actually be giving the whole story. And I might be presenting things in a way that present one side to be more favorable than the other side.
So you would say if a couple was having a disagreement and they both go, well, let's go talk to our rabbis, and the husband tells his side of the story, which is totally different than the wife's side of the story, and vice versa, that's a problem too.
Yeah, right. Just by the way, that's why when we're dealing with couples, many times I'll talk to the wife separately and then I'll talk to the husband separately and see that the story is actually not true at either stage. But the point is that there's an inherent problem, because at the center of everything is we're at the center of everything, right? We're presenting the argument, the problem to the rabbi. And then, so that comes to the next essay, which I believe is, from my perspective, I think that's really the reason why Rabbi Carmel called his book Strive for Truth, which is that it's a beautiful section in the book of Devarim, in Deuteronomy, where it says, the command that I give you today is neither hidden from you nor far off. It's not in the heavens, so that you might say, who will go to ascend the skies and bring it down for us? It's not on the other side of the ocean to say who's going to, but it's actually in your mouth and in your heart to do it. It's in your heart. That is, the truth is never that far away from us. So yes, if you can go through the process of character development to get out all those mindsets, all those things that are messing up your mind, great. But even if you can't, even if you haven't done that work, it's still possible to sit down for a moment in solitude and with honesty, and to drill down with it and honestly ask yourself, what is the right thing? And that Rabbi Dessler and the Torah is testifying that if one does that in an honest way, you will come to the truth. And that's strive for truth. It is possible to get to truth, but you've got to want it. You've got to want it and be open to it and agree to it and be vulnerable and be prepared to accept it. And if one does that, that's this last essay, which is neither hidden nor far, that it will be. That's a promise that Hashem makes to us, that it's there. And that's based on this concept that really Elokai neshama shenasata b'tahari, each one of us has a pure soul, and each one of us, deep down, was created with the strong Yetzer HaTov, right? Strong desire for the good. And anything that there is in the bad, even the Yetzer Hara, which we talk about so often, is just a distraction, really to try and distract us from what we really want to do. And if one is honest and one drills down to the truth of what one really wants to do, then everything else goes away. And just in coaching, it's very often, sometimes I'll come across a person and they're bitter and their problems that they've taken, and they're spending a lot of time talking about the problems and what's going on. And I ask them, what do you want? And when they open up, they say, well, I need to do this. This is what I want. So then all the other things don't matter, really. All the other things, they just fall away. They're just distractions. And really deep down, one knows exactly what one wants to do, and that's a strive for truth. That's really that's this end of that essay. I believe that's the idea of this whole avoda that we're talking about. All this mindset and everything is really to drill down to the truth, strive for truth, to get to the nekudas. He calls it in Hebrew, it's called nekudas ha'emes, the truth, the true point within us of truth that is with each and every one of us, because we're a breath of God, right? We are created by God, and that's in us. That truth is within us.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rabbi. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us. And if anyone wants to get directly in contact with you, I have your Rabbi Cohen's contact information in the show notes. And I look forward to resuming this conversation and our learning of this book and this text with you on the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed the episode and found it meaningful, please take a moment to rate, review, and share the podcast.